You want to talk about A Quiet Place Day One?
Yeah, let's do it. I kept wanting to call it part one in my review. I never
Mm.
did it, but I kept wanting to call it part one. But it's day one, even though it technically is kind of part one. And it's a prequel that I've been saying for years before this was announced was a great idea. Just give us different locations, give us different characters, give us this. And they're finally doing it. And so I was pretty excited for this movie yesterday, Ryan.
I'm pretty excited too. I think A Quiet Place is one of the great horror franchises of our time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that movie just blew us away. We had so much fun with it. It's still fun to watch. It's also hilarious that it's kind of getting the Twitter like revisionist treatment where people kind of
Oh,
dog on it a little bit.
what are you
Like, which
doing?
but I think it's
God.
funny. Like I sometimes that stuff just makes me laugh. It doesn't like frustrate me or get me upset. But when I like taking a piss out of movies. I especially like taking a piss out of movies that people love that I don't
Sure.
necessarily love. So, every time I see a meme of the dry erase board that Krasinski wrote on, like I just think that's so funny. But
The worst one, can I tell you the worst one? The worst one was when,
please,
and I actually tweeted this out. I'm like, what is wrong with you people? They were mad at where they were talking about how the kid was playing with his little toy in the opening
yeah,
scene of the first Quiet Place. People who clearly hadn't seen the movie and hadn't seen the sister put the batteries in, so they didn't know what they were talking about. But they're also
yeah.
like just nitpicking these things, like why is he walking so far behind his parents? Well, maybe his parents thought his sister was walking with him, so maybe that's on her. Like just these little stupid, and I'm like, guys, even if the kid knew there were batteries in it not to play, he's a kid. I don't care if
Right.
you're living in the apocalypse. He's a child with a brain that's not even close to even remotely start to develop yet. He's going to do whatever. He's going to hit the buttons. He's going to run. He's going to scream. Maybe he knows to be quiet, but maybe he doesn't think about hitting the buttons. So it's just like, people, shut up. Just shut up. It kills me that you're complaining about the dumbest thing, and it's people who do not know anything about children. So shut it.
But it's also just like exactly the point of this premise and movie that the majority of the population died because they hadn't learned what to do and what not to do, and most people
Uh-huh.
just died from making dumb mistakes.
Yeah.
Like it's like in this movie, somebody died because a cat walked by a puppet that had a bell on it. It's like
Uh-huh.
people are getting taken out left and right because of mistakes and just like dumb instances. So it's like you can just call that out, but that is exactly the point of the movie. And I mean, to talk about why day one is a great idea, I mean, we got to watch how society figured it out in real time. I think
Mm-hmm.
they figured it out pretty fast, and I'd be curious to know how you feel about that. But it was kind of like in the length of time that it took for someone to get knocked out and then come to, that's when an entire group of people had figured it out that it was about the noise. I don't know how I feel about it, honestly, but I think we'll get into that. But that's why this was a good idea to explore
Mm-hmm.
this in this movie, because I was curious to see. Yeah, I thought the flashback in part two was fun. The
Mm-hmm.
camera sits in the car while all that chaos goes on around them. And anyway, so I was excited to see this movie. And I also feel like we have to bring up Cloverfield in this conversation. I made a joke about it in one of our videos that we did, because we make like 6 videos for every movie. But I made a joke that somewhere Bad Robot is crying. So this is the third A Quiet Place. And I feel like this is how we can officially solidify that A Quiet Place just took what Cloverfield wanted to be and just hit the ground running and
Yeah.
became the far more successful franchise. Um, because I think overall, if these movies stopped here, this is a great trilogy of movies.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it's just, as somebody who's a former Bad Robot head, Cloverfield head, the fact that, like, I just wanted to give it those flowers because I think those are the obvious comparisons to make. I think J.J. Abrams should be kicking himself for not like making this part of the Cloverfield lore, but I'm also glad that it isn't, because yeah, it's just so much better. It didn't have to be it didn't have to have all these dumb ideas and do all these different things to, I don't know, be his version of the Twilight Zone or whatever he thought it was going to be. So, I mean, we kept it bare bones, and there's still enough from this premise to chew on. So anyway, I say all that really to, yes, take a jab at Bad Robot and Cloverfield, but also like just add to the hype, because I was very excited to see this, and it's a great summer movie regardless of how we discuss it here. So
Yeah, the Cloverfield thing is fascinating because I always thought that was a movie that needed a sequel, and they never really did a sequel to it. And then they did 10 Cloverfield Lane, which I really liked 10 Cloverfield Lane, to be honest with you. I think that's a really
it's
good
the
movie.
best one.
For sure. For sure. And the first one's fine. It's fun. But then they didn't really, they made an insane decision to make the other one so outlandish and out there. And he's trying to bring in these other projects and make them Cloverfield projects. And it's just like they lost their way with that franchise. Whereas Quiet Place did a direct sequel with a little bit of prequel in there. But now they're going to have the opportunity to do a bunch of stuff. And whenever they want, they can go back to the main family. And I just love, the concept of bringing in different directors. That's an obvious thing to do, but I just love the different style of this movie, the different feel of this film. And even with all of my issues, because I do think this is the most flawed Quiet Place movie and the least standout Quiet Place movie, whereas the other two feel like different entities, different beasts. This one just feels like a solid horror movie, which is okay. But all of the things that they brought to the table here were exactly what they needed to bring to the table. And it's a tight runtime. It makes for a fun theatrical experience. And that's exactly what you want from something like this. So I'm of the mindset, do one in another country, do one 200 days in, do one way in the future. Do as many as you want, because this concept is so brilliant. They could have 10 spinoffs, and even if 5 of them are bad, I'm still going to watch the 11th. And that's how impressive this is and has been so far.
I agree 100%. I will watch every installment until we've run it dry, for sure, or until they jump the shark like a Cloverfield paradox. But I mean, if you're going to give me an hour and a half of just some people trying to survive these aliens, I'm going to watch everyone. I really will. I agree that this is the most flawed as well. We'll definitely get into that. I do want to talk a second about our relationship with the first two. I think that the first one in particular, I mean, everybody's talked about that movie for sure, but I just think at a time when we're complaining about theatrical experiences and the behavior of other people, A Quiet Place brings out the best of us as movie theater fans, I think. So I think it wasn't like a packed theater, but it was a pretty a solid theatrical experience for us, because you want to see movies like this for an audience, but you also don't want to work. You want to be with people that appreciate the movie and stay quiet. But that's right now my most fond memory of that first movie, and it was just a blast, and no one made a sound in that first movie, and it just made it all the more rich. And that's what led to that incredible Krasinski moment at the end, because it was so shocking to hear a noise for the very first time. And I don't know, there was just something about that was just so special and so good. So anyway, I have nothing but great things to say about this franchise. But A Quiet Place Part 2, so I saw in theaters. That was like one of the big times that we thought we were all back from the pandemic. I certainly, after seeing that movie, was ready to come back for sure.
Yeah.
I haven't seen it since the theater.
Wow.
How many times have you revisited Part 2?
I think I've seen it twice since. I always try to get my wife in on the movies that I enjoy, so her, and then I watched the first one with my family, and so I watched the second one with my family as well. It's not as rewatchable as the first, but I've seen it a couple times since.
Yeah, so I was just kind of curious where you were on that, because I didn't have the most updated frame of reference, even though I think we agree mostly on the entire franchise. But yeah, I remembered just getting a kick out of it. I don't know. I think what I mainly wanted to hear from you is like, is my perception off? Because am I just thinking about how much fun I had because it was peak pandemic and I needed it to be great or wanted it to be
Yeah.
great? Like, or was I right about it?
I think part two, it was one of my favorite movies of that year. I think it's a genuinely great sequel that capitalized on the first movie. You know, it's funny too, because always when I'm watching these movies, it's always a memorable theatrical experience, but not necessarily because of the quality of the film. So the first Quiet Place, I watched it twice in theaters. The first time, I'm not going to say who it is because he may listen to this podcast, but someone that I went to the movie with decided to get popcorn, didn't recognize that everybody else was trying to stay quiet during the movie. And so he's just munching while people are tiptoeing in the film. And my wife and I are like, what are we doing? What are we doing? And finally we had to say, maybe just eat that a little quieter because nobody else was making a sound. And then the second time I watched the first Quiet Place, there's something called Hillbilly Days in Eastern Kentucky. That's right when I watched it. And so I walked in with my friend. We watched A Quiet Place. We really enjoyed it. You heard the Ferris wheel in the background. You heard the carnival stuff going on. So it took away from the experience. That kind of pissed me off. And then there was a monsoon, apparently, while it was happening. So while we're watching A Quiet Place, we hear screams in the background. We hear, run! And so
oh God,
we walk out to a desolate carnival. No one was out there. And my friend and I, who had no clue it was going to rain and had just watched A Quiet Place, were like, bro, what just happened? Because everyone had ran to seek shelter. And so that was one of the most unique, hilarious. We cracked up after we found out when we saw the puddles and everything that had happened. And so I feel like every time I watched one of these movies in the theater, and then the first time I saw part two, there was a fight that went on in the front row during the movie. During the movie, two people started yelling at each other. And so I'm like, man, I can't get away with not. So yesterday when we watched day one, Ryan, it was the first time that I've not experienced something hectic and chaotic while A Quiet Place was happening. But it always provides a good theatrical experience based on the quality itself.
Isn't it kind of nice, because we've seen a few movies together over the last few weeks, isn't it kind of nice to just know that the person beside you is not going to do shit?
Even my close friends, I'm like, I love you guys. I really do, but they don't see a lot of movies like I do. And so they'll start talking in the middle of the film, or they'll reach over and ask a question, or they'll check Snapchat. Like I have a cousin who sometimes checks Snapchat while we're watching movies. And I'm like, I just can't. I don't know, man. It's so hard to find someone that has that same level of respect for the cinematic experience that you do and that I do.
Yeah, when I know that I need to check my phone or just want to check my phone, I already have the screen brightness as low as possible. It's still bright in a dark theater, but I lean and show it to my face only. I also time when I decline my seat. I make sure the movie is loud and like something crazy is happening. So if I'm like, I'm going to go to the bathroom, I go on and decline my seat, and then I will wait for that moment. But I've already taken care of that. Anyway, so I'm already thinking about all that stuff. I wish more people were like us.
Same, bro. Take note, guys. We're the cinematic experts over here.
We're the shit. Yeah.
We're the shit.
No, I'm just kidding. But so anyway, glad to hear that I'm not off base on A Quiet Place Part 2, but I definitely want to watch it. I think it'd be fascinating to check it out, especially post Oppenheimer, Cillian Murphy. And I don't know, maybe get more excited about whatever it's called, 28 years, whatever it is.
Yes.
28 years later. But anyway, so I'm just going to broadly tell you why I think this is the weakest entry. Before I start, though, I don't think this is a bad movie. I'm not upset. I'm not frustrated. I'm just going to tell you why I think it's obviously the weakest. Because what's kind of cool about this franchise, based on what we've seen from our comment section, is that everybody's kind of mixed. So I think it's awesome that a lot of people think this is even the best. I think that's cool. Because we're just talking about three great movies at the end of the day. If I hated this movie, I would be annoyed, but I'm not. I think the first two movies are the best. because it just rises above the franchise, I think.
Mhm.
And it pulls it somebody who's not a horror guy like me. These are the kind of movies that I like. They pull me in, they get me excited. And this is why I talk so highly of the franchise in the first place, are these two movies. This is just this is the most typical horror movie of all three, in my opinion.
Mhm.
So we kind of talked about the revisionist history, if you will, the nitpicking and things like that. I nitpick every horror movie to death. And when a horror movie makes me ask, like, would somebody really do this? Why are they doing that? Why are these characters idiots? Blah, 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 blah. That's going to happen no matter what.
Yes.
And you just kind of have to go with it. You have to give yourself to most movies like this. But of the three movies, I feel like this movie asked the most of me in terms of buying why these characters would make these types of decisions. So at the end of the day, is it still a great movie, a great genre movie, a great horror movie? Yes, but I don't think it rises above the genre the way that the other two do. I feel like that's the simplest way to put it. We've got issues with the cat, for sure. I think the cat and a few other character choices kind of highlight my point, but that's just the easiest way to get on board with how I feel about this movie, is to explain it that way.
Yeah, if you want to go and complain about some of the character decisions from the first movie and the second movie, and the ones I was mentioning were frustrating, but there are some things that you can speak of and talk about, right? It's exponentially worse in this one, some of the choices that they make, but also the fact that it feels like at times they forgot about certain things, talking about the writers, like, where's the cat here? Why is he being held in this moment then not being held? And then, oh, look, he's back. And I get it. He would run around through a lot of the movie, but I found myself asking a lot of those questions, like why they're in the water, and then all of a sudden he's dry. And so some very frustrating things there. But also, I'm with you on the fact that this just is the least, special. And not that it's not special, because they did provide a really entertaining movie, but it's the least special of the three. It's the least frustrating, or the most frustrating of the three. And what we mentioned earlier, I do want to bring that back up. The concept of how they discovered that you have to be quiet was something that I was so excited for them to explore here, because in New York, feels like it's going to be a lot tougher, right? But they solve that immediately. And sure, the government has their methods and ways, and they're the ones probably flying around telling everybody, the police and whatever. But it's like, I do wish that was more of a process. And I wish you could have just not included them going around telling people stuff. I wish our characters could have discovered that for themselves, as opposed to just a plot convenience of being told that by the big guy above, the big government screaming and shouting, hey, shut up, everybody. And we still got some really cool sequences of people making noises, but it was more inadvertent, and it was more a lot of people walking around and those types of things. So not that it's a negative to what we actually got, but it's more just a complaint of, I wish this would have went that route, because I feel like it could have been way more interesting than some of the things that we actually saw with these characters.
I don't know that I necessarily have a problem with them finding out that way, but I wish we got to just like dance around with that a little bit more. Like having maybe a prominent character that was military that would fly in on a helicopter and maybe had a loudspeaker megaphone or whatever and talking to these people, and like maybe Lupita Nyong'o could see, like for her own eyes, somebody getting attacked because they clearly yelled back or whatever, and then notice like one of those moments where in World War Z, there's that moment where the kid who's immune, all of the zombies just like walk around him. So I think that's another thing too that I wish this movie did. Because let me bring up my point, because I don't want people to get confused. So again, this isn't a bad movie, but part of the narrative and part of the story is the idea that people have to figure this out. So I'm going to make sure that everybody understands that I acknowledge that.
Yeah.
So it's like it's built into the premise. When you call this day one, it's built into the premise that people are allowed to be more dumb. And I know that. That's why the cat is honestly the worst example of it. But I wish there were more instances of people just like making a loud noise and then just stopping and staying quiet instead of continue. Like, so if they already know they're attracted by noise, why are you running away from the briefcase that you just dropped and flopped over when the running is going to create more noise? If you're silent after that fact, aren't they just going to blow past where you're standing and try to figure out what the briefcase is? Like, I wish there was, and you don't have to figure that out in the first 45 minutes, but maybe show us this clever thing where they make a noise and they realize all they have to do is be quiet and they don't have to run. They don't have to keep waiting in the water. It's just like, I just wish there was more of a progression built into the story. And I think that's why I was so frustrated. There's a scene, not to spoil too much, but for whatever reason, when Joseph Quinn's character's amongst the aliens, he still continues to try to save the cat. And it's like, no, dude.
What are you doing?
Like, how about we contemplate whether it's smart to have a cat in the first place? Because that's what this movie made me think about. The insane liability every pet on Earth is in this world.
Yeah.
Like, think about it.
Yeah.
Dogs in this universe they're
dead.
Gone.
They're dead. They're
Gone.
So dead.
Dogs got themselves killed and their owners killed. And that was a massive reason why the majority of the pipe. That and the sleep apnea community. Gone. Just gone.
That's great. Oh, and notice how we didn't see a lot of babies in this.
That's right. They're toast.
Yeah, no babies, bro. The babies are gone. I mean, the 1-year-old.
But they do a great job. They do a great job with the baby in the first movie or the first two movies.
Yeah. And I actually, thinking about that, I really like that there weren't any babies because later on it makes more sense that they know how to contain it, they know how to hide it. But this being day one, this being the first week of this madness, it's like, yeah, all the babies are gone. We don't have to worry about them. And all the pregnant women are probably like, oh no. Oh no, I'm screwed in a couple of months. And so give me a spinoff with that type of thing, like someone who's pregnant during day one and realizes that they have to figure out how to hide. The possibilities are endless in this world. But even though they didn't think about some of those character decisions and the forgot about some things within the writing, within the script, they did think about, dogs are gone. We're not going to see any dogs. Babies are gone. We're not going to see any babies because that first day, you probably lost about half the population of the earth in that first day. And now you have people who are a little smarter, but still pretty stupid. I think of that scene, and this isn't a spoiler. I think of the scene where everyone's walking around and you got the briefcase, you've got the person in the wheelchair, and all these noises are building up and building up. And like you said, when one thing happens and you see one of the creatures jump down, instead of doing something that makes sense and using your brain, it's just like screaming and yelling and not to make noises. Why are you making noises? And so, yeah, I just felt like the decision making across the board in this movie was pretty dumb, which is along the lines of other horror movies, unfortunately.
I also think we can talk more in these movies, guys. Like, there's a scene where they're in her apartment and they're literally still not speaking, and I'm just like, guys, you can speak.
Just whisper.
Like,
I mean, it's easy. Just whisper.
Like, just barely talk. But I think if I didn't already say this, maybe I already did. But yeah, going back to my point where this is the movie that made me question its premise more than the other two. It's just like this movie is choosing what the inconvenient noises are, and I don't really care for that. So I just think it was less consistent on that front. But yeah, I think you could actually talk more. I'm trying to think of something that happened right at the beginning of the movie. It was just like the quietest thing that got somebody killed. But I can't remember what it was. But anyway, I just think the rules were the most inconsistent for this movie.
And she was going around, I won't say the moment or what actually happens, or we can talk more in spoilers, but she's doing something over here and making really loud noises, and then he like barely scrapes on some glass, and they're all like, huh? And instead of going after the big loud car, they go towards that guy. And just like the logic of that, whereas this noise is a lot louder and they're already closer to it compared to this noise, maybe that would have gotten their attention, but thinking about it after the movie was over, I don't think it would. And that happened a couple of times in this film where I didn't notice it as much with the first two movies. I did notice it more so with this one.
But I think the moments that do work for me, and this is very early on, guys, but you guys already know the premise, so whatever. But there's a character early on where after they figured out that they need to be quiet, there's a character early on where all of a sudden the power goes out and that prompts a generator to kick on. And I feel like in moments like that, you wouldn't think, and it would be more like fight or flight. So the smart move is obviously, hey, the generator just went off. Just don't go near it and you're fine. But this character, instinctively is trying to turn it off because he thinks he's going to get everybody killed. But like the idea that you can kind of like question it, I think is what makes it work.
Sure.
It's like, I probably would have done the same thing thinking I had to go turn it off. But really all you have to do in this world is just not be over there because, just shut the door that goes to that room.
and everyone is going to be
not
quiet.
Make noise.
Everyone's going to be quiet anyway. And so if it does draw them near you and the other people, then just keep being quiet. What I mean? Instead of going to turn it off.
Yeah. And again, I'm not bringing that up to complain. I'm like, those are the moments that work, I think. And then, and then there's the idea of like, you don't want to bring any aliens' attention to this room in the first place because that's where 100 people are. So it's like, I get it, but that's the kind of stuff that I think works for these movies. But not caring about this cat or not letting a cat just appear and disappear throughout the movie. I mean, it's just, I know this, it sounds so stupid to complain about it, but it's honestly just the one part that took me out. And
when he was
like
when he's climbing up the thing to save the cat, and I'm just like, look, I love my dogs so much, and I would do anything in that instance except climb up this loud thing and know that I'm going to make noise. At that point, I'd just be like, see you later. Love you guys, but no, it's not happening.